Wife traded trucker husband for rich businessman, discovered too late who he really was. The suitcases hit the floor with a violent thud as Victoria Costa threw them down in front of her husband. James Mitchell looked up from where he sat at the kitchen table, his weathered hands still holding the bills he'd been trying to figure out how to pay. His 12-year-old son Peter and 9-year-old daughter Claire watched from the doorway, their eyes wide with fear. "I can't do this anymore, James!" Victoria screamed, her voice cutting through the small house like a knife. "Look at this place. Look at us. We're living like peasants while you drive that piece of junk truck all over Texas for what? $800 a week?" Her perfectly manicured nails, paid for with money they didn't have, pointed accusingly at the modest home they'd called theirs for 6 years. James stood slowly, his tall frame casting a shadow across the linoleum floor. His face showed the exhaustion of a man who spent weeks away from home, sleeping in truck stops and gas stations, all to keep food on the table. "Victoria, please. The kids are watching. We can talk about this." "No," she cut him off, her voice rising to a shriek. "I'm done talking. I'm done pretending that this is enough. I met someone, James. Someone who can actually provide for me. Someone who doesn't smell like diesel fuel and sleep in parking lots." She grabbed her phone, showing him photos of expensive restaurants and luxury cars. "This is what I deserve. This is the life I should be living." The children began to cry, but Victoria barely glanced at them. She was too busy stuffing designer clothes into her bags, clothes she'd bought with their credit card without telling James. Richard Montenegro is everything you're not. He owns cattle ranches across 3 states. He drives a $200,000 car and lives in a mansion outside Dallas. James felt his world crumbling as he watched his wife of 15 years pack her life into suitcases. What about Peter and Claire? They need their mother. His voice cracked with desperation, but Victoria's face remained cold as stone. "They'll be fine with you. Maybe this will finally force you to grow up and become a real man instead of a glorified delivery driver." She zipped up the last suitcase and headed for the door, where a black luxury sedan waited in their driveway. "Don't try to contact me. I'm starting a new life and there's no room in it for your mediocrity." The door slammed shut with such force that the picture frames on the wall rattled. James collapsed into his chair, staring at the credit card statement that had just arrived in the mail. $80,000 in debt. Victoria had maxed out every card they had, buying clothes, jewelry, and expensive dinners to impress her new lover. Peter and Claire ran to their father, wrapping their small arms around his massive shoulders as he buried his face in his hands. Outside, the engine of the luxury car roared to life, and just like that, their mother was gone. The house felt hollow, empty, like someone had ripped the heart right out of it. James looked at his children's tear-stained faces and felt something break inside his chest. But somewhere, buried deep beneath the pain and humiliation, a spark of determination began to flicker. He had 2 children depending on him, and he'd be damned if he let Victoria's cruelty destroy their future. The repo truck pulled away with James's 18-wheeler, leaving him standing in the driveway with nothing but the clothes on his back and 2 terrified children clinging to his legs. 3 weeks had passed since Victoria left, and the bills were crushing him like an avalanche. The mortgage was 2 months behind, the utilities were about to be cut off, and now his livelihood was gone. "Daddy, are we going to be homeless?" Claire whispered, her small voice barely audible over the sound of their neighbors whispering and pointing from their front porches. The whole street knew about Victoria's dramatic exit and James's financial ruin. The humiliation burned in his chest like acid. James knelt down and pulled both children close, his massive hands trembling as he held them. "No, sweetheart. Daddy's going to figure this out. We're going to be okay." But even as he said the words, he wasn't sure he believed them. The credit card companies were calling non-stop, threatening legal action. The bank had already started foreclosure proceedings on their house. That night, after the children finally fell asleep in their beds, James sat at his laptop, applying for every job he could find. Truck driving positions required him to be on the road for weeks at a time, which was impossible now that he was a single father. Local delivery jobs paid barely minimum wage. Warehouse work meant night shifts when the kids needed him most. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Victoria. "Hope you're not planning to drag the kids down with your failure. Richard says I can get full custody if I can prove you're an unfit father. Maybe you should just give up now." The cruelty of her words hit him like a physical blow. James deleted the message and kept scrolling through job listings. Finally, he found something that might work. A rideshare driver. He could set his own hours, work while the kids were at school, and be home when they needed him. The pay was terrible, but it was better than nothing. The next morning, he sold his personal truck to a used car dealer for $3,000, barely enough to buy an old sedan that would qualify for rideshare work. The dealer looked at him with pity as James signed over the title to the vehicle he'd bought brand new just 2 years ago. His first day driving for the app was a disaster. The car's air conditioning didn't work in the brutal Texas heat, and passengers complained about the vehicle's condition. After 12 hours of driving, he'd made $63 before gas and expenses. But he gritted his teeth and kept going because Peter and Claire were counting on him. Word spread quickly through their small community about James's fall from grace. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. Parents at his children's school whispered behind his back. The man who used to be respected as a hard-working trucker was now seen as a failure who couldn't even keep his wife. One evening, as James picked up Peter from football practice, he overheard 2 other fathers talking. Poor kids. Their mother ran off with some rich guy, and now their dad's driving strangers around for pocket change. It's pathetic. The words cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. But James noticed something else that day. Peter had defended him to his teammates who were teasing him about his father's new job. "My dad works harder than any of your dads," the boy had said with fierce pride. "He's doing whatever it takes to take care of us." That night, James held his son a little tighter and promised himself that somehow, some way, he would prove Peter's faith in him wasn't misplaced. The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, taped to their front door like a scarlet letter for the whole neighborhood to see. James had 30 days to come up with $4,000 in back rent and late fees, or he and the children would be homeless. He crumpled the paper in his fist and stuffed it into his pocket before Peter and Claire could see it. That afternoon, while the kids were at school, James drove his beat-up sedan to every apartment complex on the south side of town, looking for something they could afford on his meager rideshare income. Most landlords took one look at his credit report and employment history and shook their heads. "Sorry, sir, we need stable income and good credit." Finally, a tired-looking property manager at a rundown complex near the highway took pity on him. "I've got a 2-bedroom that's been vacant for 3 months. It's not much, no dishwasher, no air conditioning, and the neighborhood's rough. But if you can come up with first month's rent and a deposit, it's yours. $900 total." James looked at the small, dingy apartment with water stains on the ceiling and carpet that had seen better days. The walls were thin, and he could hear neighbors arguing through them. But it had 2 bedrooms, and it was all he could afford. "I'll take it," he said, shaking the man's hand. Moving day was heartbreaking. They could only take what fit in their old sedan, clothes, a few dishes, and the children's most treasured belongings. Everything else, furniture, appliances, photo albums, had to be left behind. Peter and Claire cried as they said goodbye to their childhood home, but James promised them this was just temporary. Their first night in the new apartment, they slept on air mattresses on the floor and ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. The silence was deafening after living in their quiet suburban neighborhood. Here, sirens wailed constantly, and the sound of traffic from the nearby highway never stopped. James threw himself into work with desperate determination. He drove 14-hour days, accepting every ride request that came through, no matter how small the fare or how far the destination. His hands cramped from gripping the steering wheel, and his back ached from sitting for so many hours, but he kept pushing forward. Slowly, very slowly, things began to improve. James learned the city's patterns, where to position himself during rush hour, which events brought surge pricing, how to maximize his earnings. He started making connections with regular passengers, business people who requested him specifically for airport runs and important meetings. One of these regulars was Maria Santos, a logistics coordinator for a major shipping company. During their frequent rides to the airport, she began asking James about his background. When she learned he'd been a trucker for over 15 years, her interest piqued. "You know," she said one day, "my company is always looking for people who understand transportation and can think strategically about routes and timing." 3 months after the eviction, James had saved enough to buy a small dining table and 2 chairs from a thrift store. That night, as they ate their first real meal together in their new home, Peter looked up at his father with admiration. "Dad, I'm proud of you," the boy said simply. "You never gave up on us." Claire nodded in agreement, her mouth full of spaghetti. For the first time since Victoria left, James felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they could build something better from the ashes of their old life. Maybe this was just the beginning of their comeback story. That night, he researched online courses in logistics and supply chain management, dreaming of a future where his children would never have to worry about having a roof over their heads again. The call came on a Friday evening as James was dropping off his last passenger of the day. Maria Santos's voice was excited on the other end of the line. "James, I've been talking to my boss about you. We have an opening for a logistics coordinator position, and I think you'd be perfect for it. The pay is $4,000 a month to start, with benefits and room for advancement." James pulled over to the side of the road, his hands shaking as he held the phone. $4,000 a month was more than double what he was making with rideshare work. "Maria, are you serious? I don't have a college degree. I'm just a truck driver who understands transportation better than most people with fancy degrees," she interrupted. "You know how goods move. You understand timing and routes, and you've got more real-world experience than any textbook could teach. My boss wants to meet with you Monday morning. Can you do that?" That weekend, James spent his last $30 on a shirt and tie from a discount store. Peter helped him practice interview questions, while Claire ironed his shirt with the small iron they'd bought from a garage sale. The children were as excited as he was, sensing that this could be the break their family desperately needed. Monday morning arrived with typical Texas heat and humidity. James's old sedan coughed and wheezed as he drove to the sprawling warehouse complex on the industrial side of town. The building was massive, with dozens of loading docks and trucks coming and going constantly. This was exactly the kind of operation he'd been delivering to for years, but now he was seeing it from a completely different perspective. The interview went better than James had dared to hope. His 15 years on the road had given him insights into the industry that impressed his potential employer. He could spot inefficiencies in routing, understand the challenges drivers faced, and think creatively about solutions to logistics problems. When they offered him the job on the spot, James had to excuse himself to the restroom to compose himself. His first day was overwhelming. The office environment was completely foreign to someone who'd spent his career on the open road. But James approached it the same way he'd approached every challenge in his life, with determination and humility. He asked questions, took notes, and stayed late to make sure he understood every aspect of his new responsibilities. Within 2 weeks, James had identified several ways to improve the company's delivery routes, potentially saving thousands of dollars in fuel costs and improving delivery times. His boss, impressed by his practical approach to problem-solving, began giving him more responsibility and autonomy. The steady paycheck transformed their lives almost immediately. James was able to move the family to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood. Still modest, but clean and quiet, with working air conditioning and a small playground where Claire could play safely. For the first time in months, they had groceries in the refrigerator and clothes that weren't from thrift stores. Peter and Claire flourished with the stability. Peter's grades improved dramatically when he no longer had to worry about whether they'd have a place to sleep, and Claire joined the school choir, her sweet voice finally having a chance to shine. They still slept on air mattresses, but they were together, they were safe, and they were building something better. One evening, as James tucked Claire into bed, she looked up at him with her mother's eyes but none of her mother's coldness. "Daddy, are you happy now?" she asked with the simple directness that only children possess. James thought about the question seriously before answering. "Yes, sweetheart, I think I am. We're going to be okay." And for the first time since Victoria left, he truly believed it. 6 months into his new job, James had become indispensable to the logistics company. His unique combination of street-smart transportation knowledge and genuine care for efficiency had caught the attention of the regional manager, who began involving him in strategic planning meetings with clients from across the Southwest. During one of these meetings, James met Robert Chen, the owner of a growing e-commerce business, who was frustrated with his current shipping arrangements. "I'm losing money on delayed deliveries and damaged goods," Robert explained. "My current logistics provider treats us like just another number, but customer satisfaction is everything in online retail." James listened carefully, taking notes on the specific challenges Robert faced. That evening, he spent hours creating a detailed proposal for a customized logistics solution that addressed each of Robert's concerns. His approach was different from the standard corporate presentation. It was practical, personal, and showed a deep understanding of what small businesses actually needed. The next week, James presented his proposal to Robert and the company's executive team. His solution involved optimized routing for faster delivery times, specialized packaging protocols to reduce damage, and a real-time tracking system that would give Robert complete visibility into his shipments. The executives were impressed, but James's direct, no-nonsense communication style sealed the deal. Robert's contract became the company's largest single account, generating over $200,000 in annual revenue. James's commission alone was enough to finally buy real furniture for their apartment and start a small savings account. More importantly, his success earned him a promotion to senior logistics coordinator with a salary of $6,000 per month. The transformation in their daily life was remarkable. Peter joined the school's basketball team and excelled both academically and athletically. Claire took piano lessons and discovered she had genuine musical talent. They moved to a 3-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood where the children could walk to school safely, and James didn't have to worry about break-ins or drug dealers in the parking lot. But success brought unexpected challenges. Victoria had been monitoring their progress through social media and mutual acquaintances, and she wasn't happy about James's turnaround. Her relationship with Richard Montenegro had been tumultuous from the beginning, and she was starting to realize that the luxurious lifestyle he'd promised was largely an illusion built on lies and debt. One evening, James received a text from Victoria's sister. "You should know that Victoria's been asking questions about your job and where you're living now. Richard's been having problems, and I think she's starting to regret her choices. Just thought you should be prepared." James showed the message to Peter, who was now old enough to understand the implications. "Dad, would you take her back?" Peter asked, with the seriousness of a teenager who'd been forced to grow up too quickly. James considered the question carefully before answering. "Son, your mother made her choice when she decided that things were more important than family. I'll always respect her as your mother, but I could never trust her as my wife again. We've built something good here, and I won't let anyone destroy that." That night, James enrolled in an online business management course. If Victoria was circling back because of his success, he wanted to make sure he was prepared for whatever came next. He'd learned that stability wasn't just about having a steady job. It was about building something sustainable that couldn't be taken away by someone else's poor choices. His children had already been through enough upheaval for one lifetime. Whatever happened next, James was determined to protect the life they'd built together from the ashes of their old one. The knock on the door came on a Saturday morning while James was making pancakes for the children. Through the peephole, he saw Victoria standing in the hallway, looking nothing like the confident woman who had left them 18 months ago. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her makeup was smudged, and her hands were shaking as she raised them to knock again. Peter and Claire froze when they heard their mother's voice calling through the door. "James, please. I know you're in there. I need to talk to you. Something terrible has happened." Her voice was desperate, broken in a way James had never heard before. James opened the door but didn't invite her in. Victoria looked past him at the comfortable apartment, taking in the new furniture, the children's school awards hanging on the wall, and the general atmosphere of stability and happiness. Her eyes filled with tears as she realized how much their lives had improved without her. "James, I made a horrible mistake," she began, but he held up his hand to stop her. "Victoria, the children are here. If you want to talk, we can do it outside, but I won't have them upset again." His voice was calm but firm, showing a confidence and authority that hadn't been there when she left. They stepped into the hallway, leaving the door slightly open so James could hear if the children needed him. Victoria's story came out in broken pieces. Richard Montenegro wasn't the successful businessman he'd claimed to be. He was married to someone else and had been running investment scams across 3 states. When the FBI caught up with him, Victoria lost everything. Her savings, her credit, even the clothes on her back when they seized his assets. "I've been living in a women's shelter for 2 weeks, she whispered, the admission clearly painful. "I lost my job because of the scandal, and no one will hire me now. My mother won't even take my calls. James, I know I hurt you terribly, but I need help. I need my family back." James listened without interruption, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The vindictive part of him wanted to remind her of every cruel word she'd spoken, every moment of humiliation she'd put him through. But the father in him knew that Peter and Claire loved their mother, despite everything she'd done. "Victoria, I'm sorry you're going through this," he said finally. "I wouldn't wish that kind of trouble on anyone. But you need to understand that a lot has changed since you left. The children and I have built a good life together, and I won't let anyone disrupt that stability again." Before Victoria could respond, Peter appeared in the doorway. At 13, he was almost as tall as his mother, and his voice had begun to change. "Mom," he said uncertainly, as if he wasn't sure she was real. Claire peeked out from behind her brother, her face a mixture of hope and fear. Victoria rushed toward them, but Peter stepped protectively in front of his sister. "Why did you leave us?" he asked, with the directness that only children possess. "Dad had to sell everything just to keep us from being homeless. We ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner for 3 months because there wasn't money for anything else." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She tried to explain about Richard's promises, about the life she thought she deserved, but even to her own ears, the excuses sounded hollow and selfish. Claire finally spoke up in a small voice. "We missed you, Mummy, but Daddy took good care of us. He never left us." That simple statement contained more power than any accusation James could have made. Victoria realized that her children had learned to survive without her, and while they still loved her, they no longer needed her. The family she'd abandoned had not only survived, but thrived in her absence. Victoria's attempts to reinsert herself into their lives became increasingly desperate over the following weeks. She showed up at Peter's basketball games, trying to sit with James and acting as if nothing had changed. She volunteered at Claire's school, hoping to rebuild connections with other parents who remembered her dramatic departure. Most painfully for James, she began filling the children's heads with promises about their family getting back together. The situation came to a head when Victoria cornered James at his office building one evening as he was leaving work. She'd clearly been drinking, and her desperation had transformed into anger. "You've turned my own children against me," she accused, her voice loud enough to attract stares from other employees leaving the building. "Look at you now, mister. Successful," she continued, gesturing at his business clothes and the reliable sedan he'd been able to purchase with his promotion. "You think you're so much better than me now, don't you? But you're still the same truck driver I married. You'll never be anything more than that." James felt the familiar sting of her words, but they no longer had the power to destroy him. "Victoria, you're right about one thing. I am still the same man you married. I'm still the man who would work 18-hour days to provide for his family. I'm still the man who puts his children first, no matter what the cost. The difference is that now I know my worth, and I won't let anyone make me feel ashamed of honest work ever again." The confrontation escalated when Victoria demanded that James give her money to get back on her feet, claiming it was the least he could do for the mother of his children. When he refused, she threatened to take him to court for custody, saying that his long work hours made him an unfit parent. "Go ahead," James said calmly, pulling out his phone to show her bank statements and the children's report cards. "I've got stable employment, health insurance, and a clean home in a good neighborhood. The kids are thriving academically and socially. What exactly do you think a judge would find wrong with their current situation? Victoria's threats crumbled in the face of James's quiet confidence. She realized that the man she'd left behind as a failure had transformed into someone she barely recognized. Someone strong, successful, and completely self-reliant. The power dynamic in their relationship had shifted completely, and she was no longer the one calling the shots. That weekend, James sat down with Peter and Claire for one of the most difficult conversations of his life. He explained, in age-appropriate terms, that their mother was going through a hard time and might say things to try to make them feel guilty or torn between their parents. I want you both to know that you'll always be allowed to have a relationship with your mother if that's what you want, he told them. But the three of us are a family now, and nothing she says or does will change that. We've been through too much together to let anyone break us apart. Peter, now mature beyond his years, spoke for both children. Dad, we know Mom messed up. We still love her, but we don't trust her anymore. You've never let us down, not once. You're our family. Claire nodded in agreement, wrapping her small arms around James's neck. Later that evening, James received a text from his boss offering him an opportunity to lead a new regional division of the company with a salary of $10,000 per month and the chance to hire his own team. As he looked at the message, surrounded by his children doing homework at their kitchen table, James realized that Victoria's abandonment had been the catalyst for the best thing that ever happened to him. He'd found strength he never knew he had, discovered talents he'd never been allowed to explore, and built an unbreakable bond with his children. Whatever came next, they would face it together as a family that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday evening in March, exactly 2 years after Victoria had walked out of their lives. James was helping Claire with her math homework when Detective Sarah Williams from the Dallas Police Department called to inform him that Richard Montenegro had been arrested for running a multi-million-dollar investment fraud scheme. Mr. Mitchell, we need to ask you some questions about your ex-wife's relationship with the defendant, Detective Williams explained. She's been listed as a potential victim, but we need to verify the timeline and nature of their relationship for our investigation. What James learned during that conversation left him stunned. Richard Montenegro wasn't just a con artist. He was a married man with children who had been running romance scams on vulnerable women across the Southwest for over 5 years. Victoria hadn't been his only target. She was one of at least 15 women he'd convinced to leave their families and give him access to their finances. The detective explained that Richard's real name was Robert Martinez, and he was a convicted felon who had previously served time for fraud. His cattle ranches were fictional, his luxury cars were leased with stolen credit information, and even the mansion he'd shown Victoria belonged to someone else. He'd simply rented it for a weekend to impress his marks. Your ex-wife lost approximately $60,000 to this man, Detective Williams continued. Her credit cards, savings account, and even money she borrowed from friends. She's agreed to testify against him, but she's currently homeless and has been living in her car for the past month. James felt a complex mixture of emotions as he absorbed this information. Part of him felt vindicated. Victoria's upgrade had turned out to be a devastating downgrade that cost her everything. But a larger part of him felt genuine sympathy for anyone who had been manipulated and financially destroyed, even someone who had hurt him as deeply as Victoria had. After he hung up with the detective, James called Maria Santos, who had become not just a colleague, but a trusted friend over the past 2 years. He needed advice from someone who understood the professional world he now inhabited and could help him think through the implications of Victoria's situation. The question isn't whether you should help her, Maria said, after listening to the whole story. The question is, what kind of help would actually make a difference without enabling her to hurt you and the children again? You're not responsible for fixing her life, James, but you are responsible for protecting the stability you've built for your family. That evening, James had another serious conversation with Peter and Claire about their mother's situation. Peter, now 14 and wise beyond his years, surprised his father with his response. "Dad, I feel bad that Mom got hurt, but she made her choice when she left us for someone she thought was better than you. You don't owe her anything, but if you want to help her get back on her feet, Claire and I will support whatever you decide." James spent the night thinking about the man he'd become over the past 2 years. The James who had been abandoned and humiliated might have felt bitter satisfaction at Victoria's downfall, but the James who had built a successful career and raised 2 incredible children alone felt something different: peace. He'd proven to himself and his children that he was capable of providing stability, love, and security. Victoria's opinion of him no longer mattered. The next morning, James made a decision that would define his character forever. He called Victoria and arranged to meet her at a coffee shop near his office. When she arrived, the transformation was shocking. The proud, materialistic woman who had left him for a better life looked broken, defeated, and desperate. But James was no longer the same man she'd abandoned. Dressed in a well-tailored suit and radiating quiet confidence, he looked every inch the successful professional he'd become. The power dynamic between them had shifted completely, and they both knew it. Victoria sat across from James in the coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she couldn't afford, wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days. The contrast between them was stark. James in his tailored business suit, confident and prosperous, while she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I heard about Richard," James said simply, his voice neither cruel nor sympathetic, just matter-of-fact. "Detective Williams called me yesterday. I'm sorry you went through that." He meant it genuinely, despite everything that had happened between them. Victoria's composure cracked, and tears began streaming down her face. "James, I know I have no right to ask you for anything after what I did, but I'm desperate. I lost my apartment, my car was repossessed, and I can't even get a minimum wage job because of the scandal. I've been sleeping in bus stations and shelters for weeks." James listened without interrupting, studying the woman who had once meant everything to him and now felt like a stranger. "What exactly are you asking me for, Victoria?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she whispered. Maybe we could try again. I realize now what I threw away. You've become exactly the kind of man I always wanted you to be, and I destroyed our marriage chasing something that was never real." Her voice became desperate, pleading. "I could be a good wife now. I've learned my lesson." James was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Victoria, you're right about one thing. I have changed, but not because I became a different person. I became the person I always was, just without someone constantly telling me it wasn't good enough." He leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle but firm. "The man you left was working 18-hour days to provide for his family. The man sitting here today is doing the same thing, just in a different way. The only thing that changed was that I stopped letting someone else define my worth." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You didn't fall in love with who I became. You fell in love with what I achieved. That's not the same thing." Victoria tried to argue, to explain how she'd grown and changed, but James held up his hand. "I'm going to help you get back on your feet," he said, "but not because I owe you anything, and not because we're getting back together. I'm going to help you because Peter and Claire love you, and I want them to have a mother who's stable and healthy." He slid an envelope across the table. "There's $5,000 in there, enough for a deposit on an apartment and some basic necessities. I've also spoken to my company's HR department, and they have an entry-level administrative position available. It pays $35,000 a year, which is enough to start over if you're serious about rebuilding your life." Victoria's eyes widened in shock. "James, I don't understand. Why would you do this for me after everything I put you through?" "Because," James said, standing up from the table, "the man you married was always capable of this kind of generosity. You just never bothered to notice." He straightened his tie and picked up his briefcase. "The children would like to see you when you're ready, when you have a stable place to live and can offer them consistency instead of drama." As he turned to leave, Victoria called out desperately, "James, please, isn't there any chance for us? Don't you remember how good we used to be together?" Her voice was breaking, and other customers in the coffee shop were starting to stare. James turned back one final time, his expression sad but resolute. "Victoria, what we had was never good. It was just familiar. You spent 15 years making me feel like I wasn't enough, and then you left the moment someone offered you something you thought was better. I spent 2 years learning that I was always enough. I just needed to be with someone who could see it." He pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of himself with a beautiful woman in professional attire at what appeared to be a company dinner. "This is Elena Rodriguez. She's the regional director for our biggest client, and we've been dating for 8 months. She thinks what I do for a living is impressive, not embarrassing. She thinks my dedication to my children is attractive, not inconvenient. She builds me up instead of tearing me down." The color drained from Victoria's face as she realized that James hadn't just moved on professionally. He'd moved on personally as well, with someone who appreciated the qualities she'd spent years criticizing. "I hope you take the job offer seriously," James continued. "Peter and Claire deserve to have their mother in their lives, but only if you can be a positive influence. The family we've built together is strong enough to include you as their mother, but it will never again include you as my wife." With that, James walked out of the coffee shop and back to his life. A life he'd built from nothing after losing everything. A life filled with success, stability, and most importantly, people who valued him for exactly who he was. 6 months later, James stood in the backyard of the 4-bedroom house he'd just purchased in one of Austin's most desirable family neighborhoods. The moving trucks had left an hour ago, and now he watched Peter and Claire explore their new home with the kind of joy that only children who had once feared homelessness could truly appreciate. The house had everything they'd dreamed of during those dark months in the cramped apartment: a swimming pool, a 3-car garage, and bedrooms large enough for the children to have space for friends and hobbies. More importantly, it represented something that couldn't be taken away by someone else's poor choices: security, built on James's own hard work and determination. "Dad, this is incredible," Peter called out from the pool deck, his voice echoing with excitement. At 15, he'd grown into a confident young man who carried himself with the quiet dignity his father had taught him. His basketball trophies were already arranged on the shelf in his new room, testament to the athlete he'd become despite the chaos of his early teens. Claire was in the kitchen with Elena, excitedly planning where they would put her piano in the spacious living room. At 11, she possessed a musical talent that her new piano teacher said was exceptional, and Elena had surprised her with the promise of a baby grand piano for her upcoming birthday. Elena Rodriguez had become more than just James's girlfriend over the past year. She'd become his partner, in every sense of the word. As the regional director for a major logistics firm, she understood his work and shared his values about family and commitment. Unlike Victoria, Eleanor saw James's devotion to his children as one of his most attractive qualities. "You know," Eleanor said, wrapping her arms around James as they watched the children explore their new home, "I've never seen kids more grateful for what they have. You raised them right during those difficult years." Her voice carried genuine admiration for the man James had become and the father he'd always been. James's phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Over the past 6 months, she'd taken the job he'd helped her get and was slowly rebuilding her life in a modest apartment across town. More importantly, she'd begun therapy to understand why she'd made the choices that destroyed her family, and her relationship with Peter and Claire was gradually healing. "Thank you for letting me take the kids to dinner this weekend," her text read. "I know I have no right to expect your forgiveness, but I'm grateful every day that you gave me the chance to earn theirs." It was signed simply Victoria, no longer the demanding, entitled woman who had left him for a better life, but someone who finally understood the value of what she'd thrown away. James showed the message to Elena, who smiled approvingly. "It takes a strong man to help someone who hurt him so deeply," she said. "But I think it's been good for the kids to see their mother taking responsibility for her choices instead of making excuses." The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. James opened it to find Maria Santos standing on his front porch with a bottle of champagne and a huge smile. "I come bearing gifts and news," she announced, stepping into the spacious foyer. "Congratulations on the new house, and congratulations on the promotion to Vice President of Regional Operations." James had known the promotion was coming. His innovative approaches to logistics management had saved the company over $2 million in the past year, and his ability to build relationships with clients had made him invaluable. But seeing the official offer in writing still felt surreal to the man who'd once sold his truck just to pay the rent. "Dad, you're a vice president?" Peter asked, overhearing the conversation. "That's really important, right?" His pride in his father was evident in every word. "It means," James said, pulling his son into a hug, "that we'll never have to worry about having a roof over our heads again. It means you and Claire can go to any college you want without worrying about money. Most importantly, it means that everything we went through made us stronger, not weaker." That evening, as they ordered pizza for dinner in their new home, some traditions were worth keeping. James reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years ago, he'd been a broken man abandoned by his wife, facing bankruptcy and homelessness with 2 terrified children depending on him. Now, he was a successful executive with a loving partner, 2 thriving children, and a future full of possibilities. The man Victoria had left for being not enough had become everything she'd claimed to want. But more importantly, he'd become everything his children needed him to be. As Peter and Claire splashed in their new swimming pool under the Texas stars, and Elena sat beside him planning their upcoming vacation to Disney World, James felt a deep sense of peace. He'd learned that success wasn't about proving anything to the people who doubted him. It was about building a life so good that their opinions no longer mattered. Victoria had traded him for what she thought was a better life, only to discover that the life she'd abandoned was exactly what she'd been searching for all along. But by the time she realized her mistake, James had already moved on to build something even better, a life based on mutual respect, genuine love, and the unshakable foundation of a father's devotion to his children. The boy who'd once asked if they would be homeless now dove fearlessly into his own swimming pool, secure in the knowledge that his father would always fight for their family's future. And James Mitchell, Vice President of Regional Operations, successful businessman and devoted father, smiled as he watched his children play in the backyard of the home that nobody could ever take away from them. Their story had come full circle, but this time, they were the ones writing the ending.